The next thing we want to document for our endpoints is the request body that the consumers must supply. This is not relevant for the getItems endpoint that we just made, but it is relevant for our post and patch endpoints and any others that require body data in the request. So let's now work on the post items endpoint, which is down here. So we'll begin by adding a doc block above that method. And we'll then add the @API param. And we'll set this to post items. And we'll describe the endpoint as create an item. We'll then add this endpoint to the item group by going @API group and putting the value item. And finally, we'll set the name, which will be API name post items. Remembering that the name should be the compound of the method and path in Pascal case. Once the site rebuilds, you'll see we now have two endpoints documented, the getItems endpoint and now the postItems endpoint as well. You'll recall that the postItems endpoint requires body data to be supplied in the request. So a title field is required, but typically the request will also include the artist, year, image, and price fields. And we can indicate to the developer what parameters they can or should supply by using the @API param parameter, like this. In fact, we'll use this multiple times in this block, once for each available field. Now, after the @API param parameter is declared, the first value we want to add is the group to which the parameter belongs. And we're going to put this in parentheses. So let's make this group name request body like that. So using the group name, it ensures that all the fields we're about to declare are grouped together in the docs, as you'll see. Now the first field we want to document here is going to be the title field. So let's now indicate the data type of that field, which is going to be string. And as you can see, that needs to go in curly braces. We'll then put the field name, which as I said is title. And finally, we can add a description, which will just make title of the item. The second field of the request body that we want to document is the artist field. So let's add another line and put the @API param parameter there. And this will also be part of the request body group. And it will also be a string. Now the field name for this one is artist, but this time we're actually going to put this in square brackets like that. And what that does is that indicates that the field is an optional field. Finally, the description of this field will be items artist. To save a bit of time, I've gone ahead and pasted in the remaining fields for the request body, including the image, the year, and the price. And notice that all these fields are optional, and the latter two are using the number data type rather than string. Once the site rebuilds, you can see the request body for our post items endpoint has now been nicely documented. The documentation for the request body could be even better if we provided an example of a request. We can actually do this by using the @API param example parameter. So let's add a new line to the doc block, and we'll start it with API param example. We can then specify the type of request example in curly braces, and we're going to make this one JSON. So even though you can use a variety of formats for a request body in a post, JSON is pretty much the standard, so that's what we'll use. We can then give our example a title, which will be request body example. Now the @API param example parameter is a multi-line parameter. So that means we can create a new line and now put in the code example that we want to show. To do this, I'm actually going to come over to the seed.data.json file in our scripts directory, and I'm going to copy one of the seed objects out of this file because this will be perfect to use as a request example. So coming back to the item router file, go ahead and paste that in and just make sure that the format is all correct here so it displays correctly. Once the code rebuilds, come over to the browser again, and we can now see our request body example, which makes this endpoint much easier to use for our front-end developers.